The street was quiet that morning, only broken by the coughing growl of a classic Mustang stalling at the corner gas station. Its sleek black body gleamed under the sun, polished like pride itself, but under the hood it was helpless. The man behind the wheel wore a suit worth more than most people's yearly rent, his watch glinting like a badge of power. But frustration twisted his face as the car refused to start. That's when she appeared. A little black girl, no more than 12, clutching a plastic bag of groceries that looked far too heavy for her small arms. She stopped, stared at the shiny car, then at the man pacing beside it. Her braids bounced as she walked closer. He scoffed at first. What could she know about a Mustang? But when she pointed at the hood latch and asked softly, "Sir, can I help?" the air shifted. He didn't know then that this moment would unravel something deeper than broken steel and gasoline. He didn't know her hands carried more than grease and grit. He didn't know that the small, worn ring on her finger carried a story that would silence his pride and break his heart. The man hesitated, his hands still gripping the edge of the car door as if letting go would mean surrender. He wasn't used to surrender. His world was built on speed and control, private jets, manicured boardrooms, voices that carried weight because they were backed by wealth. He was the kind of man who measured respect in dollar signs and saw time as an enemy he could always outrun. So when this little black girl appeared, groceries digging into her thin arms, her question sounded less like help and more like insult. How could she possibly know anything about a Mustang, a machine that symbolized power, legacy, rebellion? He wanted to wave her away, to remind her that people like him didn't need people like her. "Go home, kid," he muttered, his voice sharp like broken glass. But she didn't move. She didn't flinch. She set the groceries down carefully, lined up the bags like they were fragile, and with a strange mix of boldness and innocence, reached for the hood latch. Her small fingers found it instantly, pulling it open in one swift motion. He frowned. She wasn't guessing. She knew. She propped the hood open and peered inside, her face tightening in focus, her braids brushing her cheeks as she leaned over. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss it all as a child's game, but something in her movement stilled him. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. She touched wires and bolts like someone who had been here before, someone who had learned not from textbooks, but from memory, from watching, from surviving. His eyes drifted from her hands to her clothes, faded, worn, the kind of fabric that had seen too many washes in too little time. Her shoes too small for her growing feet, curled at the edges. She didn't belong in his world of shine and polish, and yet she was commanding his broken Mustang like it was hers. That contradiction gnawed at him. And then he saw it, the ring. It caught the sunlight, though silver glinting against her dark skin, too loose for her small finger, sliding every time she gripped a wrench or pressed down on a clamp. It wasn't flashy, not the kind of ring that came with velvet boxes or glittering showcases. It was simple, worn, etched with tiny scratches that whispered of years it had survived. Something about it drew his eyes and refused to let them go. It didn't fit her, not in size, not in story. And when he finally found his voice, it wasn't arrogance that came out, but curiosity pressed down with unease. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked, softer than before. She kept working, her face shadowed by the hood. "From my daddy. He fixed cars before." Her voice trailed off, a silence heavier than the metal between them. Before they took him away, the words landed in the air like a weight he wasn't prepared to carry. But she said them with the kind of ease that comes when pain has already been folded into daily life. He tried not to react, standing straighter, clearing his throat as if her truth was just background noise, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. She worked with a calmness that unsettled him, her fingers moving with a rhythm that didn't belong to a child. She adjusted wires, twisted a bolt, then tapped something near the ignition, her motions as natural as breathing. She didn't look up when she spoke again, and he realized she wasn't just fixing his car. She was reliving something. He found his own voice caught between disbelief and fear of knowing more, so he asked anyway, "Who's they?" She paused, her small shoulders tightening. For a long second she said nothing, as though the word itself might burn her if she let it out. Finally she whispered, "The police." The word was soft, almost fragile, but it carried the weight of a storm. She swallowed hard, her jaw trembling slightly before she forced the rest out. "They said he fit the description. But he didn't. She pressed her lips together, eyes locked on the engine. "He just didn't come home." His chest tightened. He wanted to deny it, wanted to tell himself that she was mistaken, that maybe her father had done something, anything that justified it. That was easier than facing what she was telling him, easier than admitting that the system he'd benefited from could shatter lives without consequence. He stayed silent, but silence wasn't enough to shield him from the truth. Her voice carried the H of someone who had told this story before, maybe too many times, each retelling a reminder that the world didn't change just because you spoke. She turned the wrench again, firm and steady, like she was channeling her grief into steel. The Mustang coughed once, then roared as she hit the ignition, its engine vibrating with life, but the sound wasn't triumphant. It was conflicted, raw, like a reminder that machines could be fixed in minutes while lives could be destroyed forever. He looked at her differently now, his gaze pulled back to that ring, the silver catching light again. He didn't need to ask who it belonged to anymore. He knew. And suddenly the car, the money, the suit, none of it felt like control. It all felt like emptiness standing in front of a little girl who carried loss like it was stitched into her very skin. The man's voice softened without him realizing, his usual sharp edges dulled by the weight of her story. "That ring," he said, eyes fixed on the silver band, "it's not yours, is it?" The question slipped out almost against his will, pulled by something he couldn't name. Her fingers instantly curled around it, hiding it in her palm as though he might try to take it. Her chin lifted, her voice steady but fragile around the edges. "It was his," she said, almost daring him to challenge her. The air between them grew heavier, the space inside that open hood no longer about engines and wires but about absence and memory. "Mama gave it to me the day after." She paused, her throat working as though the words themselves cut on the way out. "She said it's the only thing we have left of him. She said it should remind me to be strong." He had given rings before, golden circles encrusted with diamonds, symbols of status more than love, glittering proof of his ability to buy devotion. They had meant so little in the end, discarded as quickly as they were worn. But this band, scratched and simple, was heavier than all of them combined. It was not a decoration. It was inheritance. It was survival. He found himself staring at her small hands, hands that should have been wrapped around toys or crayons, not wrenches and memories of loss. Her knuckles were dry, faintly scarred. The lines of work etched into them like years of life had been pressed into days. She wasn't holding on to a piece of jewelry. She was holding her father. His chest tightened in ways he wasn't used to. This was not the kind of problem he could solve with a check or a lawyer. He could hear her mother in those words, too strong, telling her daughter to carry a weight no child should. He thought about the men in his circle, how they flaunted their wealth, their watches, their cars, as if those objects were the proof of their existence. But here was a child with nothing but a silver band, and it said more about love, loyalty, and endurance than all the glittering displays of wealth he had ever known. The realization made him feel hollow. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. She had anchored him with that one small ring, a tether pulling him into a world he had spent years avoiding, a world where strength was measured not by what you owned, but by what you carried and refused to let be erased. The weight of her presence pressed harder on him than the heat of the sun beating down on the black Mustang. He stood there, suddenly aware of his own silence, of the countless times he had let moments like this pass without thought. He thought about the jokes told in polished conference rooms, the off-end remarks about neighborhoods like hers, the way contracts he signed shifted jobs far away from communities that already had little left. He had never stopped to see faces in those decisions, never thought about children like this one, shoulders too small to carry grief so vast. Now she stood in front of him, her hands smudged with grease, her eyes steady, and he couldn't escape the mirror she had unknowingly held up to him. He reached instinctively for the place of comfort he always turned to, his wallet. He imagined peeling off bills, handing them to her like a bandage, convincing himself that money could soothe what her words had ripped open. But before he could even move, she shook her head, as though she could feel his intent. Her voice was sharp but not unkind, carrying a certainty far beyond her years. "I don't want your money," she said, her small hand tightening protectively around the ring. "I just don't want people to forget. They forget so fast." The words pierced deeper than he expected. Forgetting. Wasn't that exactly what he had been guilty of? Living in a world where tragedies passed like news headlines, where injustice was acknowledged one day and erased the next by distraction, by comfort, by privilege. He had told himself it wasn't his battle, that silence was neutrality, but standing here, he felt the truth burn. Silence had always been complicity. She wasn't asking him for charity, wasn't asking to soothe his conscience with folded bills. She was asking him to remember, to see, to bear witness so her father's absence wasn't erased like footprints in sand. For once, his money felt useless, almost offensive in his hand. He thought about how many times he had solved problems by writing checks, believing that transaction was enough. But this was not a broken roof or a bill overdue. This was a wound carved into the heart of a child, into the fabric of a family, into the reality of an entire community. Money couldn't fix that. Only humanity could. And standing there for perhaps the first time in his life, he realized he had never truly given that. She gathered her groceries with the same carefulness she had shown the Mustang, lifting the bags one by one as if every item mattered, as if nothing in her world could be wasted. The car purred beside them, alive again, its polished body catching the sun like a trophy freshly polished, but he wasn't looking at the car anymore. His eyes followed her small frame, the way her braids brushed her shoulders, the way the silver band on her finger flashed faintly when she shifted the bags. He realized that she had done more than fix an engine. She had exposed something broken inside of him, a truth he could no longer seal away under layers of wealth and pride. He wanted to speak, to offer her something she could carry away besides the weight she already bore, but his voice caught in his throat. The instinct to say thank you felt too small. The thought of offering her anything material felt insulting. So instead he asked with a quietness he wasn't used to, "Wait, what's your name?" She paused at the edge of the lot, turning just enough for him to see her face clearly in the fading light. Her eyes were deep, steady, as though she was older than her years, as though she had already lived lifetimes of loss and resilience. "Naomi," she said, her lips curving into the faintest smile, one that carried both pride and defiance. It wasn't the smile of someone seeking approval. It was the smile of someone who knew who she was. No matter what the world tried to strip away, he felt the sound of her name lodge itself in his chest, as unforgettable as the story she had carried with her. She turned again, walking down the street with her bags swaying at her side, each step measured, determined, small but powerful. The ring glinted once more in the sunlight before disappearing into the rhythm of her stride, a tiny spark against the vastness of the world that had already taken so much from her. He stood motionless, his hand resting on the hood of the car she had restored, but his thoughts were miles away, chasing her figure until it blended into the distance. The Mustang rumbled steady and sure, but its sound no longer filled the silence. What filled it instead was the weight of her story, the sting of her truth, and the realization that he had been saved by more than a child's knowledge of engines. He had been saved by her refusal to let the world forget. The sound of the Mustang faded as Naomi disappeared into the distance, but her presence lingered like an echo he couldn't silence. That ring, dull and scratched, shone brighter in his mind than any diamond he had ever purchased. It was more than metal, it was memory lost, dignity and defiance all at once. It was a reminder that while systems break people, people still find ways to carry love forward. For the millionaire, the day began with a broken car and a swollen ego. It ended with a broken truth he could no longer ignore. He realized that racism isn't always in burning crosses or shouted slurs. It's in the quiet erasure, the casual dismissal, the lives stolen without headlines. And he realized that change doesn't always roar. It sometimes comes in the form of a little black girl tightening a bolt, carrying her father's ring, demanding not charity but remembrance. The Mustang was fixed, but something else had shifted too. Maybe for the first time, the man understood. Justice isn't about machines running smooth. It's about people not being left broken.